everyone. Today I am here with Dr. Emilie Amrein. Did I say that right?
You did. Perfect.
Say hello.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you tonight. Thanks so much, Kathleen, for having me.
You bet. So Emilie's the Director of Choral Activities, Department Chair, and Associate Professor at the University of San Diego. She's a choral conductor, an ensemble musician, an author, and educator. She has a long list of affiliations, credentials, and activities, at least as long as my arm. And most of you know I have very long arms. I'm pretty sure that I first met Emilie at a San Diego Choral Consortium event. I'm not entirely sure about that, but what I really like about her work is that it pushes boundaries, it makes connections, and it questions status quo in all of the best ways. So welcome, and I'm really glad to have you here today.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. That was a really awesome introduction. I was just thinking as you were speaking about this questioning and challenging, and I realized, as a kid, I was really quite the rule follower. And for some reason, I think in midlife, I've just decided to hell with it all. I'm just going to ask all of the questions. And
Love it.
Stop behaving.
You know what they say, the whole thing about well-behaved women.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are so many things that I want to ask you, that I want to talk to you about. But today, and with this audience, I'd really like to explore vocal pedagogy and warm-ups. That said, I know that this conversation will take some twists from that jumping off point. So with a leading question or two, can you tell me first just a little bit about your background, like the way you were brought up in music to approach warm-ups, maybe pre that switch of approach that you just talked about?
Exactly. Sure. So I grew up, singing mostly in school. I was raised by folks who don't necessarily identify as musical, although they have their own artistic identities. Both my mom and my dad, in fact, taught theater at the college level for some time before both abandoning higher education for more stable and balanced lives outside of academia. My parents divorced really early on, like when I was 2 or 3.
Okay.
And so my mom, as a single parent, really felt this anxiety about how to kind of create structure and community. And her choice for me as I was growing up was to put me into church school. So I went to a Lutheran school for my elementary and high school academic career. And as part of that Lutheran community in the Midwest, I grew up singing in church choir, and school choir for church services in that really strong Lutheran tradition. My family also is not particularly religious, so this was a really interesting juxtaposition. And I remember this one time I was doing I took singing very seriously because I am like far too serious of a person. And I remember I was doing some musical theater program in high school, and I was really concentrating on vocal warm-ups. And the director was like, you should really feel free to start using facial expressions and really start to embody character from this very—
But I'm busy singing.
Exactly. I was like, I am focused on technique. Thank you very much. And I will begin emoting when I deem that to be the appropriate time.
I love that. Sing first, emote second.
Exactly. And really concentrate on getting that soft palate lifted and really resonating in the mask and vowel shape and really focus. Like, I loved singing so much, but I approached it like I was taking a test and I needed to get an A. So it was always something that I really tried so hard at. It was everything to me. I didn't really fit in socially at school, except when I was singing in choir. And even then I was thinking back about this and I was like, did I really feel connected then? Or was it that I just felt somehow enlivened by using my own voice to sing somebody else's story, right? And that it gave me this sort of emotional connection to explore who I was by inhabiting other people's stories for just a few minutes, And so I felt this freedom in singing, in spite of the fact that I attended to it like it was like my job to, do all of the technique the right way. I took voice lessons in high school. I, started college thinking, what do I want to do with my life? I went to Indiana University, majored in music. It's a big opera school. So I continued taking voice lessons and really came to be a true believer in bel canto vocal technique, right?
Okay.
So really very traditional education in terms of my music, studied music theory, music history, diction, song literature, opera history, all of the works that you might encounter in a very traditional conservatory education. And again, I, studied hard, and I wish I could say that I played hard, but I mostly studied hard.
Fair enough.
And so, when you're asked about this vocal technique question, I read about it. I listened to different singers. I thought a lot about bel canto vocal technique. I tried to depict this idea of chiaroscuro for my students, thinking about the brightness of resonance and the spaciousness of the sound and the kind of paradox of that in the operatic sound world. And I really thought that that was the way to sing. That's what I thought growing up.
I think that's really common. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people. All right. So we're talking about bel canto. We're talking about taking things seriously. I want to go back for just a second to talk about what you said about having a feeling of belonging versus the feeling of having used your own voice to explore yourself, to express other people's stories, and in the process, maybe express your own story.
Yeah.
Do you think it matters if it was an actual feeling of belonging or using a story to express, using your voice to express a story? Are they the same thing?
Yeah, this type of question is like what I live for. So sorry if this ends up derailing our entire conversation. So I think so much about belonging and relationships in the choral ensemble and how we feel safe enough to show up as our whole selves. And what I talked to my students about recently is, I've been in so many truly hospitable spaces where I still have made the choice to withhold part of who I am. And that has been such a realization in the last 2 or 3 years of my adult life that I can be in arguably a space where all of the conditions are right for belonging, and I still didn't allow myself to be seen and known. And, talk a lot about that with my therapist.
Excellent plug. Everybody needs a therapist.
Exactly. And I mean, I do think it matters really, because as teachers and as musical leaders, we're cultivating social spaces, right? And you're setting the table, you're putting out the decorations, you're, like making sure the temperature's right, that the food is cooked to the right temperature, that it's beautiful, and that you're like truly consumed by, I am in any case, consumed by creating conditions for people to feel not just comfortable, but free. And to realize that lots of folks in my life have tried really hard to create those same conditions for me, some less so than others, but that as much as we create hospitable spaces, it requires showing up in a particular way to allow true connection and true belonging to take place. And I think a lot about that in relationship to the diversity work that I've been doing in the last 5 years. And much of that has been inspired by my experience being a parent of a child with a disability. And so I think a lot about her experience in the classroom, what inclusion means for her, and how even the best of intentions might not create the conditions, or might still not allow somebody to come into the space feeling free enough to show all of the facets of who they are, all of their identities. And so I've thought a lot about that. And so the question is, does it matter? Well, I guess that is a really good question, and I don't have a good answer. It seems to matter to me because I think about it a lot. But I hope that
I think that's a fantastic response. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking, well, maybe one leads to the other.
Mhm.
maybe you discovering your voice, you weren't quite ready to give over fully to that feeling of being included or that feeling of belonging, because that in and of itself requires some vulnerability, doesn't it?
Yeah, right. I think a lot about our experiences in childhood and how that sort of sets a trajectory, how we process the traumas that so many people experience in childhood, and that we kind of are working through all of that as young adults and into midlife. I mean, this is the work. This is the work. Actually, I wish I would have been working on that instead of like the technique and the posture and all of the things.
But maybe that work of striving for something as part of a bigger group allowed you to cultivate a space inside yourself where now you can do the work. I would submit that we're not all ready for that when it's ready for us.
True, true. I think that's completely true. And I want to, honor and um give myself grace too. I even hear my own judgment in recalling all of this. So it's a constant battle, or maybe not battle is not quite the right word, but it is a practice, right? A practice. And we have to kind of think about practice as a ritual of love. And I'm working to make that practice a daily thing.
So, how do we take the things that we just talked about, striving for excellence as an individual singer, as an ensemble singer, and putting that together with creating this welcoming, inclusive space where people can do the work? So
Mhm.
as a teacher, as a leader of an ensemble, or maybe even as a member of an ensemble, how do we crack that open a little bit and make space for ensembles to come into that kind of magical space?
Right. Well, I'm going to say something controversial, and I've gotten a lot of pushback about this. And so I hope we have a little bit of time to kind of tease it out here. But I think that um, when we talk about excellence, we often mean something that I don't think that we intend to mean. And I think for a lot of folks, excellence in choral music means a particular type of sound, a particular type of a set of performance values, a particular type of fidelity to and emphasis on notation, that oftentimes limits how people are able to show up in the space. And while I think that all of those things are valuable, that's the controversial part, because I think that sometimes when I talk about, this idea of excellence and kind of breaking open the idea of excellence, um, a lot of folks are like, but you want to throw away everything. And, I think that that's not really it's kind of a logical fallacy, right? To me, I think that we as artists and musicians and humans need to think about excellence as perhaps as wholeness, perhaps as vulnerability, perhaps as expression of realities, and also the expression of aspirations for the yet to be. And if those, in fact, are how we measure excellence, rather than, this fetishizing of a type of sound production that is coded for race and gender and sexuality and class and this and that and the other thing, that then we start to see the way that this music making practice has brought people together, has healed wounds, has transformed political realities. And I feel like lots of folks talk about music's capacity to do those things without acknowledging that, how we do the music sometimes results in the opposite of that, and I want to, it's a nuanced kind of way of understanding that I think we're disincentivized from entertaining because of the way that the arts and arts education have been marginalized in, public education largely. But I think that there are ways for us to do it differently that can allow the music making to be more than it is for a lot of us.
Those are some really wonderful and expanded thoughts. I think this idea that you're getting at of whether it's reframing how we use the word excellence or adding that into a larger bubble of connectivity and storytelling, I see it emerging more and more. And I see it emerging at all levels, academic levels, community group levels. As a matter of fact, today I just published a chat with Deek Sharon, who is like doing, on one hand, completely opposite things of you, but really saying the same things. Why do people come to concerts? They want to feel something. They want to hear your story. They want to get to know you. And I've heard your groups before. You could measure them as being artistically, musically, vocally excellent. But I think the priority of having connection and meaning is what makes it more than just a, I'm kindly clapping, nice job.
Right. And thank goodness there are more folks talking about this, because, when I was in college and even as a young professional, I feel like that was not the case. I mean, I heard time and time again that I needed to be different as a leader, different as a singer, different, like that I could not come with ideas that diverged from like the standard, choral archetype, conductor archetype, choral singer archetype at all. Like, you need to be more of a disciplinarian.
Absolutely.
You need to be more authoritative. You need to dress like in a suit in order to command the respect of the ensemble. You need to put people in their place when they're out of line. Like all of these things, which are like antithetical to who I am as a human being.
And antithetical to co-regulating one another's nervous system in a place that will create belonging and vulnerability, which is really needed to create transcendent music. And as a person who was raised, I was in the instrumental world, so it was probably even a few more steps up towards that militant, dictatorial feeling. And when I started, I tried those shoes on for a little while, and they didn't fit very well.
Yeah.
And I learned that there was a lot more power in other ways that was an inclusive power, and it was a holistic power.
Right.
And not a wielded just by me.
Yeah.
Because the conductor, is the only person who's not making any noise. We're not actually making the music.
Right. Right. And I think that orientation to relationship and to art making is really so much a part of my philosophy of education also, and this has to do with kind of like a way of coming into a space where you regard the people that you're meeting with, whether they're your students, community members in a choir, strangers, whomever, as having something valuable to contribute to the joint effort, the collective. So many folks still come into the space with that old school, sage on a stage kind of orientation where, you're going to using the Freirean language of like, you're going to do the banking model of education where you're going to take all of the ideas that you have and you're going to deposit them into the empty containers, the vessels that are in front of you that are your students, And so thinking of the choral space, the rehearsal room, the concert, every kind of social convening as a place where co-learning happens, where I'm learning from my students as much as they are learning from me. I think that that's really the direction that I would love to see choral music education move in more intentionally.
That intentionality is so key. When you were speaking about the top down and emptying your brain into the next, I think that's why it's persisted for so long. I'm going to do it the way my teachers did it, and they're going to do it the way their teachers did it, and they're going to do it the way their teachers did it. And it doesn't take very long for that to replicate itself, but I also think putting a deliberate block in it will free us up to go so many different directions.
True. And I will also say that there are reasons on the other side why it persists also, right? As a student, I have to say, I mean, again, I was an excellent student, but I actually loved going to lectures. I loved going to lectures and having information uploaded into my brain. I found it to be easy.
Right.
And satisfying. And I was just like, keep talking. And I'm just going to sit here and like absorb it. And there was something satisfying about it. But what I recognize now in retrospect was that um, that the easiness of it informed how I showed up in that space. And it was passive as opposed to being an agent and a collaborator in my own learning. And I think that there is so much about our consumer culture that positions us as passive, and by design. A hyper capitalist hierarchical society thrives when people don't move. And to like put yourself in that reality as like a cog in this, massive societal wheel, this structure that ends up dispossessing so many human beings on this planet, extracting the vitality from this earth, you have to like break out of it, right? And I think that is kind of at the root of this shift, where I went from being like a well-behaved person to being somebody who's been radicalized truly, to say this, I do not want to be passive anymore, right? I have things to contribute, and importantly, I have things to continue to learn, that I'm never going to be a like finished product, and I'm always changing, acknowledging the fact that that change is all around us and always happening, to realize how static people are in this kind of naturally moving world. You just have to break out of it. And that actually is where the freedom has come from for me, right? It's maybe perhaps first by singing other people's stories and feeling kind of the power of these identities in my own body that were kind of like latently there. But really, I think stopping like the disobedience is where I feel like that freedom has mostly come from, actually.
I absolutely feel like we could do this all day, and we have so much to talk about. This is just like the very tip of the iceberg. I would like to steer us to one more story,
Sure.
which is when I first approached you for this conversation. You shared a story with me about when you were in London and you were asked to warm up a choir from Sri Lanka. Can you tell us just a little bit about that experience and how it changed your approach?
Yeah, that was such a transformative moment. And I've been kind of chewing on that and intending to write about it for some time. So I was in London for the London International Music Festival, and Andre de Quadros is the artistic director of that festival. And he had brought his group from Sri Lanka, the Muslim Choral Ensemble, which is one of the few Muslim ensembles in the world that is dedicated to performing Muslim devotional music. Being with this group of humans was such a transformative experience musically, because I was in their company for much of that week, observing rehearsals, listening as closely as I could, watching how they learned music, how they improvised, how they, allowed the music to kind of spin out into the sort of timeless. I mean, I'm trying to think of the best ways to describe this musical language, right? And what I realized, or what I was affirmed in that experience, was realizing just how the myth of music's universality is really not true, right? That music means different things in different contexts, right? And this is something, of course, that scholars have been writing about for some time now. But for me to realize that when asked to warm up the choir, that I did not have the musical tools to facilitate that in terms of the kind of microtonality that was embedded in the musical language, the repertoire that they were doing, and the vocal production, that I just realized how limited my own education was, right? That I did not have the musical tools. I mean, I got up there and did it because I was poked and prodded to reluctantly, and I tried to kind of do as best I could with kind of fifths, open fifths, and not really like doing kind of the equal tempered thing. But that wasn't in my wheelhouse, so to speak. And in terms of the timbral difference, I didn't feel like I had the vocabulary to ask the singers to do anything other than the bel canto vocal technique, right? Let's raise the soft palate, let's lower the larynx, let's resonate in the front of the mask, let's create this chiaroscuro, when that color palette is not part of the paradigm of this repertoire. And to realize that, it was like a light bulb going off, and you realize the many ways that kind of the Western tradition has taken on this idea of universality, right? That the way to make music, that the only way to make music, or that the only real way to make music is in this tradition. The only way to make vocal production that's efficient and beautiful is in the bel canto tradition. That the best way to convey musical ideas is with Western notation, and that so much of the practice of music education in this country is rooted in that myth of universality. You just realize what a disservice that education has done. And I mean that personally, right? Like that I feel that I don't have, that I have been excluded from the richness of the world's musical traditions because I was told and I believed that this was the way to do it, right? And it is a way to do it. It's no better than any other way of doing it. And perhaps because it has that malignancy of like, this is like supreme. And I use that word intentionally, right? Because the idea of this way of knowing and thinking about music as superior to other ways is connected very much to these really persistent and pernicious ideas of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of imperialism, of coloniality, of carcerality, all of these really destructive ideas that end up hurting humans, right? And not just emotionally, materially and physically and psychically, like all of the ways that you could hurt somebody are baked into this particular way of knowing. Having that experience and realizing just the ways that I had been myopic in understanding how to make music and how to lead music, it really it was very humbling, shall we say, you know, to realize that I couldn't do it, you know, and that I wanted to be able to be in good relationship with these humans who had welcomed me so graciously into their community, and to realize that I showed up without the skill set to really navigate that. It just made me realize the arrogance of kind of the Western way of thinking. And I really regret that I wasn't, I mean, I don't mean to like put so much self-judgment on it, but I really, I wish I could have been better equipped. And now I try to be better equipped, and I try to come into the space with more humility, and that there are other ways of thinking about it, and other ways of learning, and other ways of expressing oneself, and other ways to relate to other people and to communicate. And, you know, all of these threads end up coming back to a common point. And I'm so grateful for that kind of clarity, because I think that when you look at your life in a certain way, it's like you look and you see all of these different kind of threads and different points. If you're looking at it, you know, from the present into the future, perhaps, or like, what am I going to do? I'm going to make these choices. Or even in reflecting, it looks kind of like a mess in reverse even. But then you start to realize that this was connected to that moment, and that moment was connected to this moment, and that moment, there is in fact a common thread, but it wasn't a line, and that there were things that were overlapping, and that there was this always present curiosity, I guess, about how to be whole, you know. And I feel like maybe that story, even at the beginning, was part of that journey, right? That, like, how do I show up in this space? How can I be my whole self with all of its contradictions and its all of the joys and brokenness and trauma and striving and questions? And how can I come into the space and honor all of those parts, you know?
There's that archetype of the tortured artist, which, you know, in some ways unfortunate. But the other thing I'm hearing is, through this discovery and through this pain, how much of a better musician have you become? And how many more people have you been able to lead through these ideas, breaking away from that top-down model in which we were both musically raised.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that comes back to the question of excellence. You know, when you ask how much better of a musician have I become? Well, I actually don't know how to answer that question, because I don't know if I've actually become a better musician, but I hope that I've become a better human. You know, I hope that I've become more like better able to listen. I hope that I've become um, more forgiving of my own self. I hope I've become braver in showing up as my whole self in spaces. And I hope that I've become more, that I've expanded my capacity to be in relationship with people, because I think that that's really actually what matters. I mean, this is a music conversation, but at the same time, I don't know, I just wonder, like, is that what matters in the end? You know, does it matter that that realization changed my approach to music making? Maybe if we're talking about it, you know, on the human side of it.
Yeah, and I think that's really a beautiful topic to end on, is just, has this made me a better human? Has this made you a better human? Has it facilitated the path of other people to become more connected and become better humans? I'm a better human for having met you, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's been such a wonderful meandering conversation. And, you know, I look forward to being able to have more of these conversations in person.
Sounds good. We will do that. Take
Thanks.
care.